more than 2 million Scots facing level 4 lockdown measures for the next 3 weeks, what financial assistance is available to those whose workplace has to close? David Martyn's an employment lawyer at Thompsons Solicitors. Listen, we just want a very quick refresher. I think that's the purpose for this conversation. Rishi Sunak has extended the furlough scheme, as we know. Remind us, does it work exactly the same as it did last time round?
I mean, it does to some extent. What we do is we reset back to the period around about August. As you'll remember, the furlough scheme was tapering off. The grants from the government were getting smaller and smaller with a view to sort of everybody coming back into employment. But actually what happened at the start of November was we went back to a position where we had a much more generous level of financial support. So that's where we are just now. What employers still need to pay effectively is a relatively small amount of the hours that their employees aren't working. So that's national insurance contributions and also pension contributions, roughly about 5% of the wages that would otherwise be paid.
Right, and there will be some people who are in the extremely unfortunate position of having been made redundant before the Chancellor extended the retention scheme. What happens to them? Can they be rehired and then put onto furlough?
Well, that's right, they can, up to a point. I think it's the 23rd of September, as long as they were dismissed after that point, then they can be put back into employment and re-furloughed. I think the difficulty we've found is because the furlough scheme was announced quite late in the day, and I think it was really done almost as an emergency response. A lot of employers are still very wary about bringing people back in, having gone through redundancy processes which are extremely disruptive, extremely upsetting for everybody concerned. It's very, very unusual. While technically possible, we've had very few examples of people actually making use of that provision.
Yeah. What support is there, remind us, for the self-employed?
So the self-employed grants still exist, and those have been reinstated. I think the difficulty with self-employed grants has been the level at which they are payable, and it does exclude a huge number of self-employed people who are over the eligible levels for the quantification of earnings for those purposes. And I think the difficulty has been for self-employed people this uncertainty in terms of their businesses. They've just not been able to plan moving forward. The support is there, but again, we're not entirely sure that it's being accessed as much as it could be.
Yeah, now the one difference, I guess, this time is the travel ban. It was guidance last time, now it's law. Is that going to have a bearing on whether people decide to go to work or how practical it is for them to go to work?
I think it's important for employers to be very, very clear with everybody that's working for them that, if they are an essential business, if they are allowed to open, if you're in construction, manufacturing, you are allowed to open, you are an essential business. All of the people who work in those businesses, if you're working in Glasgow in one of the suburbs and you have to travel between local authorities, you are permitted to travel. And I think it's really up to employers to make that crystal clear to their employees that, travel is allowed for that essential purpose of work.
Yeah, and just remind us, what financial aid is the Scottish Government providing at the moment?
To be honest, the majority of support is really through the UK furlough scheme. There is individual business support through the Scottish Government, but I think that has been really a lot of the political argument around this has been, the Scottish Government's inability to borrow and therefore provide the support. So the majority of support for employees is coming from the UK Government. Okay.
Any other major issues you're seeing just now? What else are people coming to you with, David?
I think the biggest difficulty here is really one of employers who are, despite the availability of the furlough scheme, you do not have to put employees onto the furlough scheme even if you can. And I think that is really frustrating for employees and for employee reps because they know that funding is available, but yet a lot of employers are not actually accessing the funding. They're pressing ahead with redundancies. They're taking a very conservative approach, and that's really, really frustrating that you cannot oblige your employer to put you onto that furlough scheme. It's a big hole in the scheme, and it's really disappointing. And I think that's why we may see that, at the end of all this, that there are an unnecessarily large number of redundancies when the scheme was available. It's just employers haven't made use of it.
Yeah, not clear yet by any means, is it, what we are going to see at the end of all this? All right, David Martyn, employment lawyer at Thompsons Solicitors, many thanks indeed.